Welcome back. So here I want to talk about script execution order. Why do we care? Well, let's take a look. Here's a bug in our system. I'm going to put two balls in my scene. One of them I'm going to move away from the other one. I'm going to give them, well, first just look at what we've got. We've got these two balls with some rockets. Let's turn the rockets off. So I'll just disable the rocket scripts. Okay. So we have two balls with gravity forces. Now, what the hell's going on there? Look at the gravity vectors. They're not away from each other. Let's just set their speed to 0 for a minute and start again. So both balls, no velocity. Watch the gravity trails. They're facing away from each other as you'd expect, and the balls will be moving towards each other slowly, which they are. By the way, they may look like they're not moving towards each other. They actually are. It's just that our camera is locked to the left-hand ball. So they are moving towards each other. You can confirm that by looking at the coordinates of both balls. You can see in the inspector there that the Z coordinate is changing for both. Okay, so what's our problem? We've got the two balls. Let's just separate them out a little bit. And now let's start to give them some velocity. Let's give them a velocity of, say, 100 in the x direction. Oh, what the hell's happened to that force vector? Why has a velocity changed the apparent force on this ball? That doesn't make any sense. Okay, so what we need to think about is something called script execution order. So we're going to expand on Unity's script execution order document, which we'll open in a second, demonstrate our bug at high speeds. I've just done that. We'll talk about how this relates to the fixed update time. Let me show that right now, and then we'll separate out the universal gravity. So you can see that what's happening, the reason for this error is that if the amount that the ball moves in x is significant compared to the fixed update time, look at that kind of angle there. You get a feel for that angle at a velocity of 100. Now let's change the project settings, time, and let's calculate our fixed update loop 10 times as often, put a 0 in front. Fixed update 0.02. Now see what happens. You see the angle is pretty much nothing now. But if we were to be traveling 10 times faster, so start with the velocity of 100. You see the angle is tiny now, but make it 10 times larger than that, and we've got the same problem back. Right, so it's to do with the fact that if you look at your physics engine script, what's happening is if we just look at the fixed update trail, we're calculating gravity, and then we're updating the position for a given object. Then we're moving on to the next object. So when we get to the next object, the first one's moved. So let's start with Unity's execution order document. Here it is. It says that we have start, and then fixed update, and then there's an update. What they don't tell you is how different scripts interact together. Well, they do in the text, but they don't tell you in the diagram. So what we have is each script instance in a column there. For example, the physics engine on ball 3, and then the physics engine on ball 1. We'll run its awake function, then going down in time, the next script will run its awake function, and so on. So what we're getting is that we're concerned here about the fixed update loop. That happens for one of the balls, and it includes moving the position of the ball. So by the time we get to the next script instance on the other ball, the ball has moved. That's why the force vector is pointing in the wrong place. I hope that makes sense. So the solution is to move our universal gravitation calculation out into a completely separate script, and then use script execution ordering to run the universal gravitation calculation before we start summing up the forces and doing the gravity. Now, I've purposely said physics engine on ball 3 and then physics engine on ball 1 in that order, because until you pin down the execution order of the scripts, it's kind of a free-for-all. So this is where you pin down the execution order, project settings, script execution order. And we're going to be able to add an execution order in here. All right, so let's just recap what we're doing. We have different scripts and different instances running in different orders. At high speeds, which means that the ball is moving at a high speed compared to our fixed update loop, we have a problem where the ball is moved before we move on to the next ball and do the gravity calculation. The solution is going to be to move universal gravity calculation out to a separate object. And that's what I want you to try and do as a challenge. I want you to create a new game object called universal gravitation. Move all the gravitation code out of our physics engine into a universal gravitation.cs script, make it work, and test that it now works at high speeds. We're still going to have a problem when we have high relative speeds, but that's fine. That's a fundamental limitation of our physics engine. What I don't like is the fact that we have an inaccuracy when we have no relative velocity. If they're all hurtling through space, there's absolutely no reason we should get these weird artifacts. So go ahead and do that. Move universal gravitation out to the global frame, which makes sense anyway. See if you can make it work, and I shall show you in a moment how I do it. Okay, welcome back. So let's take a look at this. Let's go get our calculate gravity code. There it is. I'm going to take the whole method, take it out. Cool. Let's go to Unity. I'm going to make myself a new game object. I'm going to call it universal gravitation. And it's just going to be a game object sitting there in the game. Fantastic. Now let's add a script. And let's call it universal gravitation per our challenge slide. Okay, so we have a universal gravitation game object, and we should have a new script, if I actually finish creating it, called universal gravitation. Okay, fantastic. I'm going to pop that in the scripts folder and start editing it. Alright, so that's fine. Into universal gravitation, let's get the code in, calculate gravity. Fine, so what are we missing? Why is calculate gravity not working? Well, universal gravitation is going to use a physics array. In fact, the only thing that uses a physics engine array in our physics engine code is this universal gravitation. If you look at it, it finds it at the start, and then it only uses it in the universal gravitation code, which we've removed. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing over here. We're going to take that out because we only need it for physics, universal gravitation physics specifically, and make it available in universal gravitation. And then in the start, for now, we do need to think about start, update, awake, etc. But for now, let's just find it in start. Should be fine. Finds all objects of type physics engine. Okay, now this code now makes sense. It only needs to do this once, actually. It needs to calculate gravity. Well, it needs to do it every time, but it only needs to find the physics engine once, and then we only need to iterate through every object's effects on every other object once, like this. One more thing we need to bring across is big G. Again, it's related to gravity, so we take it out of the general physics engine class now that we see the abstraction, and we bring the constant in here like that. Okay, so calculate gravity method doesn't make sense in fixed update of the physics engine anymore. That's fine, because we've moved all the code. Where are we going to do it? We're going to do it here. Void fixed update. And then we're just going to say calculate gravity. Hope that makes sense. I've literally just moved the code and all the bits that support it across into this other script. So this script is only added now to the universal gravitation object in the scene. Let's see what happens if we just run. Oh, we seem to have two force vectors. That's encouraging. Are these things moving towards each other? Is it actually working? Let's have a look at ball 1. Yep, it's moving. Ball 2 is moving towards it. Great, so that's encouraging. Now let's try the problem we had before, which is that ball 1 and ball 2 had some velocity to start with. In fact, they already do. Let's try 1,000. Let's see what happens. Yeah, see the relative velocity, well, the velocity of the two balls relative to the global coordinate system, the fact they're just hurtling through space together, is no longer mucking up our velocity vectors, just because we're calculating it out in a separate script. Now, we can't be sure at the moment that the gravitation is being done before the force calculation, so let's just be sure, because this is the sort of instance where one person's machine may execute scripts in one order and another in another. So you come to Edit, Project Settings, and Script Execution Order, and we go for universal gravitation is calculated first, and then the physics engine runs. Okay, we just check that that has the desired effect. We'll see no change because it was working before, but that makes it more reliable. It's more likely to run in the correct order. Now, you might say, well, haven't we created ourselves a maintenance problem? Every time we add a new component, we have to add it here. That's true. You could realize that it says default time here. So, for example, if I say minus 100, then this thing will come before the default time, then physics engine. How about we just put physics engine after the default time, and we leave all our components in the confidence that they should happen before the physics engine. So let me look at those project settings again. Script execution order. So everything else should happen before the physics engine runs. So hopefully that runs fine on your machine too. Now we have decoupled the calculation of all the objects. And also we've saved a lot of computation because we only go around this double loop once now per fixed update, not for every object. So this is much more accurate, much more correct. So enjoy that. Hope it makes sense. I'm going to leave the objectives for the lesson up as a summary. Actually, I'll leave this up for you. This reminds you that things not only happen in the order awake, start, fixed, update, but this is how they happen across different script instances. So now we've got universal gravitation's fixed update running first, and then all of the script physics engines get run. So we add all the forces to the physics engines list before the physics engine goes and sums them together and makes them work. Okay, hope that makes sense, and I'll see you soon.